Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, and now we're joined here in the studio by Dr. Mohamed Halim, the political analyst. Dr. Halim, thank you very much for joining us. First of all, before we get into the Egyptian-Saudi relations, I want to take a quick look on the Egyptian-Russian relations. Now, it has gone through its own ups and downs. Do you feel that now, after putting that whole plane crash incident behind us and them inviting us to the Astana talks regarding the Syrian crisis, do you feel now we're back on track on the relationship?
Yeah, what would seem to be quite obvious, actually, the fact that the Egyptian policy is in many ways trying to mend and correct its own path towards the right direction with the Russian administration, with the Russian authority, actually. And that would seem to be quite, from my own point of view, the only alternative left, actually. After the sort of the attacks and the menaces and the threatening voices on the part of the American administration, as represented by, Donald Trump, despite the fact that he seems to be at the very beginning very much propagating, the negation and the isolation of the Muslim Brotherhood. But I think, from my own point of view, the fact that this is the last trump card at his own disposal, the fact that the Muslim Brotherhood, came to be ended nowadays, and Hillary Clinton is just one part of the past that should be ended by no means now from the new American administration outlook. And that's why, actually, I wouldn't propagate, actually, a very optimistic look on the new American administration towards the policies and the diplomatic affairs of the Middle East concerning Egypt as well. The Russian side is very much implementing very good political ties and mending the sort of the relationship. As you might have said at the very beginning, that's the sort of the relationship that connect Egypt on the one hand and the Russian side on the other would pass through, certain stages of ups and downs every now and again. But nowadays, particularly during the sort of the victorious and the triumphant impact on the part of the governmental troops as represented by Bashar al-Assad in Aleppo, actually the Russian side and the Russian authority and the Russian implementation of a large number of very much successful situations in the Middle East came to the fore. And as such, I think that the Russian side is mending as its own tie with the Egyptian side, in much the same way that our own political leadership is playing very much successful roles towards mending and correcting the ties with the Russian authority being the the final alternative to be left, actually, for us after the sort of the negation and after the sort of the far from being friendly attitude on the part of Donald Trump. A couple of weeks ago there was a disclosure of some information on the part of the SP, the intelligence department on the part of the Russian organization about the attempt, and hidden attempt, and the taciturn agreement between America on the one hand and some other Arab country, as much as Qatar, to try to devastate the Egyptian armed forces, to try to put tussles and struggles before the people, to try to maximize a large number of, social problems in the Middle East, particularly in Egypt. And immediately after the sort of, the spying airplane that had been crashed in 2013, it seems to be quite obvious that the American administration, no matter how old or new, wouldn't be in favor of our own political distinguished authority and our own political way of ruling the things and of dealing with the issues of everyday life. That's why I would say that not only from an economic point of view, but also from social as well as military point of view, the Russian side is playing a very important, very much distinctive role, not only actually in Egypt, but also in the Middle East, being the final alternative left actually for most, if not all of the Arab countries actually in the area.
Well, Mr. Helwa, now, from the Russian relations, now, Egypt also had a very strong relationship with Saudi Arabia, historical relationships. However, even after the 2011 revolution and for the years that follow within the political turbulences that Egypt has been going through, Saudi Arabia has been a very strong ally for Egypt, really granting Egypt a lot of financial support and financial aid. However, recently, a lot of reports and a lot of political analysts and observers thought that the relationship between Saudi Arabia and Egypt is not at its best and is witnessing a new low, even though the Egyptian government came out and said, no, the relationship with Saudi Arabia is still good. Now, there are many reasons for this relationship to maybe turn a little bit sour. One of which is the Iranian influence within the region and the conflicts there. How do you feel? Do you feel that Saudi Arabia has a reason to be a little bit upset or a little bit concerned about its relationship with Saudi Arabia, or do you feel that these are false reports that are coming out from people who are trying to really find some sort of division within the relationship?
Well, I cannot really deny the reports because this is a political game. And Saudi Arabia going into Syria and going into Yemen needed a strong Arab country to support it, like Egypt, for example, maybe Algeria, someone with a very strong army. So the historical ties between Egypt and Saudi Arabia will continue despite our conflicts. We will always have conflicts, like a company. Partners do have conflicts, but we're still partners. So for the time being, I think things are normalized because the situation is not that tense. If it was tense, there's about 3 million Egyptians working in Saudi Arabia. They would have been expelled, and we will witness a real tense situation. But this hasn't happened yet. So I think the situation is really normalized, and it's just political disagreements.
Yes. Well, talking about political disagreements, Dr. Abdul Halim, now a lot of people are really debating this issue here in Egypt, is the Tirana and Sanafir situation. Is it Egyptian? Is it Saudi? Is Egypt letting go of its land? No. Is it legal to actually, it was already a legal right for Saudi Arabia to actually claim responsibility and sovereignty over these islands. How do you read the situation? Should the people accept it as a fact? Should we oppose it as a fact? How do you evaluate the situation?
Yeah, right. I mean, part of the straining actually of the diplomatic relationships between Saudi Arabia on the one hand and Egypt on the other is the issue of Tirana and Sanafir actually. I mean, but I think the political leadership was quite resourceful to a greater extent as to leave it actually to the parliament actually to decide its final decision about it actually, to give it a final go actually, and to say whether or not it is belonging actually to a Saudi territory actually or to Egyptian land. And this is the final destination actually on the part of our own political leadership. But concerning the sort of the straining of the ties and the diplomatic relationships between Saudi Arabia and Egypt, I think that this is part of the international conspiracy actually, part of the hidden agenda and the part of the American administration. Every now and again, America is trying to put tussles and impediments actually within the sort of unification. Don't forget the fact that, you know, I mean, our Mr. President Fattah Sisi was calling in the first instance actually for an Arab unified army actually that would put an end for all the aspirations and the dreams of the Israeli land, as much as for the Persian existence in the Gulf area. Attempting every now and again to change the sort of the name of the Gulf area and as belonging to the Arabs actually as a Persian area, just by way of revitalizing the old dream of the old empire of Persia. But this is, you know, I mean, unrealistic grounding. Again, part of the, you know, the struggle and the diplomatic trouble that does exist actually between Saudi Arabia and Egypt, on the other hand, is, you know, I mean, the abstaining from providing us with the oil on the part of Aramco as a company, despite the fact that we do have a sort of an agreement between the Egyptian side and the American and the Saudi on the other. The fact that they would seem to be quite, you know, I mean, forcing the Egyptian political leadership actually to go side by side with the American administration. And part and parcel of the tussle and part and parcel of the problem is the fact that Egypt and the representative of Egypt actually in the UN Security Council did vote at the end of the day in favor of the Syrian political leadership as represented by Bashar al-Assad. All these reasons and all these things would cooperate at the end of the day just by way of putting a sort of tussle and a sort of an impediment between the diplomatic relations between the Saudi Arabia kingdom on the one hand and Egypt. But I think we still do have and hold actually very good strong ties and very much historic relations that would go back actually to more than 100 years ago. And I think a couple of days ago, a very diplomatic delegation on a highest level actually was trying to fill the gap between both parties actually, even though it would seem to be quite very much secretized. But I think at the end of the day, we are more than one nation, very much belonging to each other, and in the meantime holding very much firm ties that would bring both of each party actually to one unified goal at the end of the day. If you do understand the situation from a political point of view, that this is a hidden agenda actually on the part of the American administration to try to separate Egypt from all the other Arab countries, from Libya, from Syria, from Saudi Arabia, and from Yemen as well.
Yes.
As it was represented by the Houthi rebels and the Houthi militants actually.
Well, Mr. Helwa, now it seems that, well, Egypt will be joining the Astana talks later in the month, and subsequently Saudi Arabia, among other countries, will be joining in later on, at a later stage. Saudi Arabia seems to have a lot of baggage of political conflicts or maybe political disagreements or a little bit of differences with Egypt or other countries as well participating within the talks. Do you feel that this can affect the talks in any way, or is maybe Saudi Arabia along the other countries that will be participating at a later stage merely just some sort of a formality to actually have a unified agreement regarding solving the Syrian situation, and it wouldn't really have any bear any effect on the talks?
Well, Saudi Arabia want to have a concession in the new Syria. They have investments to propagate, they have companies to get involved, and they have to have a say in the political situation. So their involvement is really important. Saudi Arabia is a major country in the region, one of the richest countries in the region. So they have to be involved, they want to be involved, and they have a say. They will make a lot of leverage to the talks.
Do you feel that the baggage that they have, all the conflicts, all the disagreements that they have with other countries participating in the talks would have any effect?
No. It's an isolated talks.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Abdul Halim, if we are looking as well on the Egyptian foreign relations as a file, now Egypt has gone through great lengths to strengthen its relationship with the African states, and one file seems to always pop up in any discussion is the Ethiopian Renaissance Dam affecting Egypt's share of the Nile water, having Ethiopia, Sudan and Egypt really the three parties involved in the situation. We always say no, they're not going to go through it, and yes, they are going through it. Now we're waiting for the verdicts of the French consultancy firms, and we have to all abide by it. It doesn't seem that we found some sort of resolve or conclusion for this issue that has been going on for years. How do you assess Egypt's strategy dealing with this file?
Right, it's a very crucial issue actually. The Renaissance Dam is one of the most crucial diplomatic affairs actually being laid so wide open for discussion now. Some parties would assist actually the interference on the part of political and diplomatic affairs just by way of, finding solutions at the end of the day. Some others are very much concerned with how to put an end actually for the whole situation right from the very beginning by all possible means at our own disposal. I would go for the first, not for the second actually. And so far as actually now the dam has been built, has been erected, and the source of the water had been provided actually, and everything would seem to be quite well prepared actually for the effusion of water. That's why Egypt and Sudan, being part and parcel of the effusion countries, they would have one destiny, one final destination, which is sharing actually the final and the ultimate solution at the end of the day. The fact that the president today of South Sudan actually was visiting Egypt, and I think that the diplomatic affairs and the diplomatic relations are to be very much strengthened nowadays, just by way of, coping the situation that had been presented, a couple of weeks ago when a high delegation on the part of the Saudi Kingdom would visit Ethiopia just by way of fortifying the idea and assistance of, erecting the Renaissance Dam, followed by Qatar a couple of days ago. That's why I think the situation would seem to be very much crucial. And the interference on our own political leadership should be very much based on diplomatic affairs, on missions, on machineries, on what you might call the diplomatic solutions, actually. So long as everything has been said and done, and so far as the sort of the dam has been established and erected, I think that there are other diplomatic affairs that would put an end for the sort of the perpetual struggle, the struggle that has been initiated actually since 40 years ago, actually.
Yes. Well, Mr. Helwa, Egypt is also not just involved in the Syrian crisis, but it also is hosting talks to solve the Libyan crisis. Now, it is Egypt's next door neighbor, and it poses a big concern for Egypt's security. Also, there are a lot of Daesh extremists there. Now, what can Egypt offer, or how can Egypt solve or have a major say in solving the situation in Libya? Is it as advanced as everyone is expecting the Syrian situation is? Is it still at an early stage? How do you feel Egypt should tackle this file?
It's a very complex situation in Libya because of the extreme number of militias. Regardless of having radical Islamists there, but there are too many militias there to control the political will. So let's say at the top level, the political will is to have stability. The militias will have another agenda, which is very not in line with stability. We have a very big problem right now with the central bank of Libya providing salaries for everyone in Libya, including Daesh. So how can Egypt get involved in this? I think Egypt have a lot of influence on the eastern part of Libya, and historically and currently, 1 out of 3 Libyans has an Egyptian mother. So we can softly try to control the situation in the east. We can also control the borders. We have very porous borders, which allow extremists to come in and out very easily, and you can see that from the smuggling routes. So if we control the borders and have a soft political say for the eastern provinces, which is up all the way to Benghazi, there might be some stability in the east of Libya. The west have a different culture, and I'm not sure how well we are able to control the situation in the west of Libya. I think they're more lenient toward the Tunisians, which are our allies as well, and maybe they're doing their part of that.
Yes. Well, do you feel that Egypt has, as you say, Egypt has a strong influence within the eastern side of Libya, but do you think that would be enough to actually have a strong say or a strong influence in solving the Libyan crisis, or do you feel that we need other countries to participate with such talks? Do you feel that maybe other countries such as Tunisia, maybe other countries such as Russia that have proved that they have a strong say in what happens in Syria, maybe they would be influential as well in Libya?
Well, it depends on what the Libyans want. If they're inviting the Egyptians will go in. For the time being, the Libyans are divided towards the British, the French, the Russians, the Americans, the Egyptians. So every faction or a group of militias are inviting some of these countries to try to stabilize the country. As we speak right now, there are forces from Russia and Syria, Russia and France, and the British special forces are in eastern Libya trying to control the situation. So if we are invited, I'm sure we will support.
Yes.
So it all depends on the Libyan will. What do they want?
Yes.
Egypt is a natural ally for Libya. They feel more comfortable talking to us.
Yes. Well, Dr. Abdul Halim, we keep talking about these crises within these states, and we talk about all these different players. But what about the role that will be played by the U.S. administration? Everyone made a big deal of the different strategies that President-elect Donald Trump will take in dealing with these situations in the Middle East and fighting extremism. How do you see now, after a few days after Trump actually assumes the office in the administration, how do you feel they would fit themselves in within all these crises, the Syrian one, the Libyan one, and so on and so forth?
Yeah, well, I would like to say that the United States of America, a country of constitutions and institutions, actually, no matter how the president may be, he or she. If you look for the presidential American elections during the course of the previous 40 years, you will find actually that the same strategy is being channeled, is being directed within one same route, here, there, and everywhere, that would never ever be changed, which is the establishment and the fortifying of, between two inverted commas, our dear friend Israel, which is part and parcel of the existence of the American daily life, actually. And I wouldn't say that's Donald Trump's way of dealing with the Middle East people or the Middle East area actually would undergo some slight change. He would seem to be quite going and coping with the same strategies that had been put before by the IPAC, by the lobby, the Jewish lobby, and by those, titanic groups actually that would seem to be quite doing with the strategies of the Middle East like puppets, like marionettes. The fact that he would never ever be changed in the due course of time, he will be concentrating and very much, propagating the establishment of the Jewish state. A couple of weeks ago, he was one of, the ardent believers of changing the capital of Jerusalem to be actually the major capital of the land of Israel. And in the meantime, he would like to change the place of the embassy of the United States of America to be not in Tel Aviv, but actually to be there in Jerusalem. This is a clear testimony to the fact that he has got one-sided attitude, which is the establishment, the fortification of the Jewish state here, there, and everywhere.
Yes.
He would seem to be quite insisting on the same principles that had been laid down since 40 years ago.
Yes. Well, Mr. Helwa, speaking of Israel now, we've mentioned earlier Iran's influence within the region and how it would be welcomed or not so welcomed. If you're basing it on economic interests, it would be welcome. How do you feel Israel would react to such a growing influence by Iran within the region?
Well, of course, it's a scary situation for them because Iran has historically been vocal about their anger towards Israel, hate towards Israel. So this is something that they have to consider, how we're going to deal with Iran when they're included in the game. So for the time being, I believe that Israel is trying to broker deals with other Arab countries to be its ally in case there is a disagreement with Iran. So there are talks with Saudi Arabia now, there are talks with Egypt, talks with Libya, there are talks with the Jordanians, the Syrians. They're involved in building a lot of allies. And it's all based on economic interests.
Yes. Well, ladies and gentlemen, definitely a lot of political developments taking place nowadays. Egypt will be joining the Astana talks later in the month. Also, Egypt is talking to find a common solution for the Syrian crisis, and Egypt is also hosting the talks regarding the Libyan situation here in Cairo. We're going to be following up all of these developments and all of these talks here on Nile International. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this edition of the Daily Debate. But before we go, I'd like to thank our very distinguished guest, Dr. Mohamed Abdul Halim, the political analyst. I'd also like to thank very much Dr. Sherif Helwa, the political analyst. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us this evening. Ladies and gentlemen, please stay tuned for more coming up on Nile International. I'm Hani Saif. Thank you for joining us.